Welcome to the Dashboard Effect Podcast. I'm Brick Thompson.
Caleb Oakes.
All right, Caleb, today we're going to be talking about untrustworthy data.
Yep.
What is untrustworthy data?
It's data you can't rely on.
Very good, yeah. So untrustworthy data is bad for a lot of reasons. We'll talk about that. There's sort of four main types. I mean, everything falls into these buckets. You've got stale data, so data that's out of date or it's not being collected anymore. You've got unclear data. This is the type of data where you may have naming conventions that aren't being followed. The classic example is you've got a customer list or a customer data set of customer names, and you have two names that are slightly different for the same customer, and sort of getting those to line up. You've got inaccurate data, speaks for itself. And then, of course, no data, which definitely happens sometimes. So the problems with untrustworthy data, what's the main problem that you see?
There's a lot of different problems, right? I mean, there's the obvious ones, like you can just make the wrong decision because you're relying on something that's not reliable. That's a good one. But obviously, if people can't trust the data, they're going to figure out what they can do so they can trust the data. And that usually involves pulling the data themselves and reporting on it and, mashing things up on their own. So lots of different ways. Yeah.
And, all of those, we talked last week about becoming a data-driven organization and how user adoption and trust in the data so that people actually start to use it to drive the organization can really be hampered by a lot of things. But untrustworthy data is one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, right. And it's so easy to get trustworthy data. Just have it start permeating through your systems and not even realize that it's causing a problem if you don't have visibility into it. Right. So you may have a process that's not quite being followed the way you intended, or maybe you have a poorly designed process that is causing some bad data into your systems. You may have no way for people to see that the data is actually bad, so they can't go clean it up and they can't fix it and they can't stay on top of it. Lots of different ways that it just happens throughout the course of business if you're not keeping an eye on it. You usually uncover it at the most inconvenient times.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you uncover it. I mean, one of the problems with bad data is you may not even know it's bad, right? So you're making decisions on data that's not good. I think one of the points you made as we were talking about this earlier was one of the best ways to figure out you have bad data is just to give everybody exposure to the data, because people will notice it and then can bring it to attention. But you also have to have processes for fixing it then.
Right. And I think what we see a lot is, and it even happened at one of my early career jobs was I was an analyst, and one of the things that I had to do, I was creating these inventory reports that I was sending out to salespeople so they knew where their inventory was and what they could sell and that type of thing. And there was some data in there that every week I had to move one business unit's inventory into another's because it was just categorized incorrectly. And that's just a small example of what happens in most of the companies that we see anyway, where they have some sort of manual reporting process, and that's just where your data gets fixed.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that happens every time, and you just hope that it's the same every time.
Right.
And then if that person leaves, you hope that the next there's some good documentation, and it can turn into a mess. And you see that all the time.
Yeah, those processes can fall apart on you fast. So what are the best ways to go after? What are some best practices to try to avoid getting bad data?
Yeah, so you already touched on one, like get the data out there, make it visible. But I think one of the first things that you should do is define what your metrics are. And this seems so elementary, but it's so important. Like, it's surprising, it's shocking really how many times we see companies come in, and when they start working with us and we start doing projects with them, it's like redefining all of their metrics, because they didn't know that, this group of people, group A, defines it differently than group B, and there's actually confusion on what the metrics actually are. And then you got to go back and forth and get an alignment on it. So a lot of times you may not actually have bad data, but it may be untrustworthy because people are viewing it differently.
Right. Yeah, and you'd be surprised at how often, well, you wouldn't be, but some people would be surprised at how often something that seems like, all right, you can't define this differently, like net profit. Sure, everybody's defining that the same. And you find out sometimes they're not. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so critical to align on that, because that's not even necessarily an underlying data problem, but it's still a problem when it shows up on the reports, and now you have inconsistent data. And so people view that as untrustworthy. They're less likely to use it, and you hamper your ability to become data-driven even more that way.
Right. Yeah, so another thing that you could do is you can designate an owner of your metrics.
Yeah.
So you can picture like your org chart, and then each person would have one or many metrics that they are responsible for, and they know they're responsible for it. Everybody knows who's responsible for what. And then not only is that just great for your business, but it also allows those people to start taking action that's going to keep that data clean and kind of spurring along process change or just data cleanliness efforts, those types of things. Yeah. If they know that that's kind of their thing. They want that to be accurate, right?
Right. If you're responsible for a number and you're looking at it and it's not reflecting well on your responsibility, and you suspect it's because of bad data underneath, you're going to go after that and fix it.
Yeah, right.
And it's just good practice from a management standpoint anyway.
Right.
Everybody should have accountability, and in the best case, everybody has a number. Everybody wants to know the score.
Right.
So you sort of get a double benefit with that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, okay. What else?
So we already talked about just exposing the data, just get it out there, get it into the front hand or the frontline workers' hands, right? When I was my first job out of college, it was a lot of like very manual stuff that I did. And I was so in the weeds on handling specific details at a time. Like I've never really had a chance to step back and look at, all right, is everything that I'm doing here, how is it, winding up in the data, right? There's a lot of data entry stuff, and it would have been great to have that like every day, to be able to see the global view of just my data. Does this look right? And if it didn't, then I could go fix it that day. But every day for me was just record by record by record by record. And I think that happens a lot. And your frontline people will clean stuff up if they know where the problems are.
So you're just doing data entry, but you don't know sort of the macro view.
Right.
You're not seeing the checksum of, is this adding up to something that makes sense?
Right. I may have made a mistake or knew I was going to go back and fix something and forgot or whatever, but having that bigger view allows you to do that. And then there's no problems with giving that type of view to those people, and they will fix it.
Oh,
It's amazing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's a good example. Another thing that comes up is something we talked about, just having unclear data. So we had a customer that had a bunch of products in a product database, and there were things like the same product would be called Snickers in one place and Snickers bar in another place and 12-ounce Snickers somewhere else. But they were all the same thing, and in the sales report, they wanted to be able to report on that one thing. And so you can actually go after that and do what's called data quality services, or use data quality services to clean that up and actually give people who know the ability to go in and say, this is actually the same as this, so that the end report is what you were hoping for. It's not actually 3 Snickers bars, there's one.
Right. Yeah, that can be a really powerful tool, and I think you touched on it early about the customer issue. That's very, very similar. Like you have the same customer, but they're spelled slightly differently or something. That can be really important when you're looking at lifetime value of your customers and things like that. We see it a lot in the private equity space with the buy and build, where you're bringing on different companies that just name things differently. But it turns out now you're going to want to roll those up under a single customer. And doing something like that helps you do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the most important things, well, you've already said expose the data, but people shouldn't be surprised that once they start doing reporting, it's going to expose untrustworthy data. But that's a good thing, because then you can go back and fix it.
Yeah, I think we, in our projects, I think back to so many of them, when we get into them, we find out like, sorry that you've been reporting on this for 10 years, but it's wrong.
Right.
And, you really start to do an audit like that. And that can be a good thing. It shouldn't be viewed badly. It's, it's one of those things that you just have to do. And going through that process is, it's kind of a necessary evil, but ultimately it ends up in huge benefit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think another thing is it touches on a podcast we did maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago about data projects shouldn't be viewed as one and done. It's not a discrete project once in time and that's it. You have to, data is really a sort of a foundational resource, and you need to be ready to go in and make changes and be okay with that. So just get that sort of into the data culture of the company, that it's a living thing. There's going to be changes that we make to the business, and so we've got to change maybe data we're collecting, or we change the instrumentation, or we augment the data with a new data source. That's just sort of part of it, and the sooner you realize that and make it part of your whole data culture, the more likely you'll be to not end up with untrustworthy data. You're still going to have cases of untrustworthy data, but you can go in and correct it.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And then, another thing that we touched on in our last episode was that community of practice. Right. Mm-hmm. If you've got something like that stood up, people know where to go ask questions rather than see something that looks maybe wrong and then just think that report's wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Or think that the data is bad. They can go ask the question. They can get a response. And, then that helps build the trust in, your data and the reports that you've got out there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else you want to say on the topic?
Untrustworthy data, it's just bad.
That's a good summary.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Caleb. Talk to you soon.
See ya.